Love, exciting and new.
Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever.
It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships of Bermudan and British Registry.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
Whether it was with her old band Chairlift, her solo music as Ramona Lisa and CEP, or the Beyoncé collaboration No Angel that she co-wrote and co-produced, Caroline Polachek's distinctive musical voice has always bewitched me. It's a voice informed by goth, R&B, folk, nu metal, classical music, and a deep childhood love of Disney music, as you'll learn in the interview ahead in episode 36 of LSQ. Hi, I'm Jenny LSQ, thanks for pressing play. In addition to this new interview with Caroline, I've also included a pretty lengthy archive clip from 2001 with the late, great Scott Weiland. That's in honor of the fact that it was just recently Scott's birthday, or do they call it birth anniversary when the person has already passed? File under depressingquestions.com. Anyway, I'll tell you more about the interview with Scott when we get to it. And first, some quick background on the occasion surrounding this conversation with Caroline. She visited me here in Brooklyn earlier this fall in the weeks leading up to the release of a solo album called Pang that is excellent, by the way. And significantly, it's the first album she's ever released simply under her own name. All right, let's get it started. We were just saying before I turned on the microphones, the last time we had a sort of a running encounter backstage at a Lollapalooza. And yeah, I guess I sort of didn't know where in the world you had been traveling to since then, but you were just saying these days you're kind of starting to reside in LA and settle on that side of the country.
Yeah, I've been bumping around mostly between London and LA for the past 2 years, and finally just decided to move my rent checks from New York to LA.
Do you think that that there's something about a location that makes you inspired? Do you feel like it's distilled through a place when you're being creative?
Yeah, it's so mysterious, and it's so many different factors as well. Like, I think the most obvious example that for me was working on a solo project I did in 2014 called Ramona Lisa. I spent a few weeks in Rome doing a residency in a castle in Rome, and that project kind of came directly out of the experience of being in that place. But this was so different. I mean, so many major cities have so much crossover now just because so many people are traveling and coming in and out. And phones make it so easy to get around. You don't really have that experience, that kind of othered experience in cities the way maybe you did like 10 years ago. But but London was kind of the right cocktail for me of like the scene there being really inspiring, and also just the setting. Like, I'm a romantic, and at heart I'm a goth, and being around all that old building, all the old buildings, the old stories, the old even the cemeteries there.
Right, because when you're writing, there's always a window, right? Is there usually a window in the room you're writing in?
The window's metaphysical, isn't it? Like,
right.
it comes
there are
in.
many windows.
Yes.
But I would imagine that just even just for I think what anyone can relate to, looking up from your desk, wherever it may be, and whatever your eyes rest upon. It's like you have to think about what your eyes rest on when you're creating.
It's the commute too. Like, whenever you're switching off, like before or after working, where are you? Who's around you?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about? And one of the amazing things about London is really the contrast. I mentioned how there's so much, I mean, at least by American standards, ancient stuff around.
Yeah.
But also I feel like in a lot of ways it's more forward thinking in terms of technology than America is. Like being over there, and I guess I'm saying this about the UK and Europe in general, but like, being in a place that's kind of so quick to embrace sustainable energy, for example. Their subway system is a lot sleeker and more high tech than ours. And and I also feel like the electronic music scene has a whole different legacy there than we do here. Like especially in New York, I feel like there's so much fetishism of older things, like even of the history of hip hop or the history of sampling and the history of house music. Whereas in London, I feel like everyone is so interested in like technology and new sounds, and they have been. That's just built into the culture there.
I know. It's now that you say it, it is all, in so many places around the world outside of here that have more history than this country has, that are more embracing of technology-driven music, you know, in Germany and Russia and all these places where, like, electronic music is just like massive pop phenomenon. That is interesting. I wonder if in America we're young enough still that we're so attached to we've fetishized our creations, we've fetishized our rock and roll and our Hollywood,
Oh yeah, and they fetishize it too. I mean, we're not alone in that. But
yeah. I mean, that's good stuff. Rock and roll in Hollywood, good stuff.
I mean, everything we're talking about is good. I guess in some ways, maybe being around older things makes you feel newer.
Yeah.
And I got quite inspired by that headspace.
So, I just to give you a roadmap of our conversation here, because sometimes I'm talking to an artist who doesn't have like an important new thing about to come out, and you do, and I want to talk about it because I've been listening to it and I love it. And it's exciting. It's the first Caroline Polachek album. Like, yay! What have you been waiting for, etc. I'm curious to know all of these things. But also, the thing I do on this show is really try and talk to people as well about like their earliest inclinations toward music. So I want to start with that, which is just what do you remember about feeling musical as a kid, or the moments when you first felt, or in a larger sense, creative?
I think Disney was a massive entry point for me. Kids don't really go to concerts. Like, yes, we had music classes in school, but I grew up watching movies. We didn't have TV at my house growing up. And my sister and I would watch Disney films on repeat, like over and over and over again, the way a lot of kids do. And I started figuring out how to pick the songs out on the piano. And a lot of these Disney songs have pretty complicated kind of jazzy chord changes in some of them, or like kind of quite classical chord changes. But I didn't really give it much thought. And I was given a keyboard, like an electric keyboard, a Yamaha PSR, when I was 7 years old. In part because my dad was a classical musician, and he was also very kind of irritated by sound and by music that he didn't like. And so I was given a keyboard that had a volume knob so that I could be turned down and play quietly, so my dad didn't have to hear me. And I realized that this keyboard had a plus button on it and a minus button on it. And if I hit the plus button on it, the notes would change that came out. And I didn't really understand exactly what I was doing at the time, but what I was doing was transposing. So I could kind of figure out how to play the song in one key, and then I could hit the plus or minus button until it lined up with what was happening in the Disney film and could play along. So I learned how to rip in the key of C.
Wow.
And could just transpose the keyboard to sync it up to the real key.
Is that a standard keyboard feature?
Yes, actually, and not just keyboards, but all synths you can essentially transpose with. So as like a 7-year-old, I really learned intervals, I learned melodies, I kind of started understanding chord relationships, but in this way where I wasn't really thinking about it. It just happened really organically.
Right.
But Disney films were a huge point of entry.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
I lived in Tokyo till I was 6, and then I lived in Connecticut till I was 17.
And so the not having TV, but having a TV on which you could watch Disney movies, I mean, was that sort of a parenting choice, or just sort of a
circumstances?
Oh, it was a very active parenting choice. Like, I go to friends' houses on play dates and I would just like glue myself to the TV screen.
Because your parents felt that to exercise some control of what you might watch on the box, at least,
Yeah.
they would narrow it down to things
Yeah.
they approved of. Yeah.
Yeah. And in some ways I'm really grateful because the films my mom got me were amazing. We were given like ballets and operas to watch as well, and I'd invite friends over and be like, look, do you want to watch Sleeping Beauty? And then I'd put on the Sleeping Beauty ballet, and my friends were like, this is not Sleeping Beauty. And I was like, no, but it's great.
Wow. Yeah.
But I think like I did have ADD as a kid, but I think having a restricted kind of media that I could interact with actually made me focus on it in a way that I would not have focused on it if given like hundreds of options.
Limitations are fascinating.
They are, but at the same time, I missed out on a lot of cultural touchstones that a lot of other kids
So
knew
yeah,
about.
I mean, because you're of the age when like Prime, MTV,
Nickelodeon
era. So did you develop a kind of urge to dig into it? I mean, would you when you would go to friends' houses be like, show me some MTV? Like
Yeah.
kids whose parents don't give them any sugar, and then they go to a friend's house and they're like eating all the chocolate.
By the time I was 14, 15, I definitely found ways to get MTV into my life.
Right.
I remember watching like the Dope Show, Marilyn Manson music video, and just being like completely amazed by that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's got some Disney qualities to it.
Yeah, and
Just
then
twisted Disney,
when I-
Twisney.
Disney, and then seeing the Bjork, Chris Cunningham videos as well, like Nine Inch Nails videos.
Oh yeah, terrifying / awesome.
It was just amazing. I felt like I'd been waiting my whole life to find stuff like that.
So the music you were hearing was just through these. I mean, were you listening to pop music on the radio at the same time, or did your parents have a music collection for you as well?
Yeah, I listened to radio. I had a tiny radio that I could listen to in my room. And I started buying CDs at about the age of 10. Alanis Morissette, Jagged Little Pill was my first album.
Good choice.
I just found out it's one of the top 10 best-selling records of all time,
it
which is
yeah,
shocking.
And like some Bob Marley, Eagles,
No,
Michael Jackson category.
Eagles have number 1 and number 3. Mind blown.
One is a greatest hits, and one is
And
the Hotel
3
California
is
album.
exactly. No, 1 is Greatest Hits and 3 is Hotel California.
Yeah, yeah.
So wild.
That is insane. Yeah. But that goes back to the sort of like, wow, once we decide what our favorite thing is, America, we really like the Eagles.
Yeah.
Well, it is our national bird after all. I guess that's the Eagles are like,
Totally.
when we were picking our name, we never factored in the just innate patriotism. So I want to go back to the keyboard for a minute. Your dad gave it to you so you wouldn't be playing piano loudly, potentially. But were you already the idea of, I want to try and play music, or were you asking for after it, or
Yeah.
did you just figure
I
like,
think I
oh, here's a
was.
toy, I may as well explore it?
No, I was so drawn to it, and drawn to the piano. And again, in a way that felt like really very natural.
When did the idea of figuring out how to play these songs from the Disney films and such begin to translate into writing your own songs? Was it a pretty immediate curiosity?
It was pretty immediate. I think, like I said, I was pretty ADD as a kid and didn't actually finish compositions until I was about 14. Finish songs. I mostly just learned how to play other things up until that age.
Yeah. And what inspired you at that point to try and write?
I think it was this idea, which, was so saturated in the 90s, of kind of singer-songwriter acoustic guitar and vocal music. So I learned the basics of acoustic guitar and started doing like school talent show style competitions with songs I'd written.
Right, like kind of folk songs.
Yeah, which I then immediately abandoned and started singing in nu metal bands after that.
Oh.
But that phase right prior to that was when I started writing my own songs.
Nu metal. So, because you just don't hear any female-fronted nu metal in the annals of nu metal. I've never been exposed to that. I feel like we're living in a time when nu metal is being rescued from its bad reputation that it had at the time, where it's like, I see kids now that like stand for Limp Bizkit, and I have to be like, let's just take a moment here to ask ourselves, do we really need to say that all things that are guilty pleasure are good.
Or
Because they're not
entering the
all
canon.
good. Some guilty pleasure things are still kind of crap, but you like it anyway. Not to, and I love Fred Durst and Wes Borland. I think are awesome dudes and awesome artists. But I digress. But nu metal, you were into it. You're like young enough that could have been a true passion.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
intrigued by
I was in 2 bands. I don't even dare tell you the names of them in case recordings ever surface. But
Yeah. You
I
were
had-
the singer.
I was the singer and I wrote the songs with the other guys in the band. I had
In the vein of like Disturbed and like that kind of thing.
I think.
Wow.
I mean, for me, it was like a kind. I saw my role as kind of an Evanescence
Oh yeah. Right.
thing, but it was riffy. It was like very guitar riffy. There were kind of some mathy elements in the drumming, and we would play. We'd mostly rehearse in garages. We'd play friends' barbecues, that kind of thing. We'd once in a while play at the local teen center, which was a big deal.
Did it feel important to you at that age, what you were doing, that was like one of the ways you identified yourself in the world as like a kid who played music?
Absolutely. And that was also kind of a weird thing for me as a girl because there weren't any other girls at my school that listened to harder music. There were like girls in the drama department and who I sang with in choir, who I really liked, but I didn't really feel as if I had any girls that I could kind of share that with.
Yeah.
So I mostly hung out with guys for the last 2 years of high school, which I wish. I mean, they were great guys, but I just wish that. Yeah, it took me a few years after that to kind of feel like at home amongst groups of girls and women again, because I think I had kind of gotten into this headspace where like, well, this is it. If you're gonna be like, musician playing in bands, you got to get used to being around all guys all the time, and maybe in some ways that was true.
Well, it was true for then, at least.
It was true for then, and there were a couple moments in Chairlift when we had essentially an all-male, besides me, touring party. But we also had some almost all-female moments as well. So
Yeah, and I mean, especially as a kid, you adapt to your tribe and you behave the way they behave to,
yeah,
it's like a approval vortex or something.
yeah.
And you can't really see what's happening until you're out of it. And you're like, wow, I really acted like those people while I was hanging out with those people.
100%.
But in terms of being an outlet for emotional expression or whatever, like was it already at that point becoming a thing you felt like you needed to do?
Absolutely. I was completely addicted to it. And even more than expression, I felt like it was a kind of identity. Like, being in that band, being that girl at school, it gave me a kind of sense of comfort in my identity. Like, okay, I'm that. That's what I am.
Yeah.
But I also shouldn't simplify it too much either. I was in 7 musical ensembles while I was in my senior year of high school, in those 2 bands. But I also started an a cappella group called the Accidentals, which was me and 6 other girls.
Oh my God, great name.
It was terrible. There was a boys a cappella band that I was very jealous of. And I was like, why don't we have a women's one? But we would cover pop songs. And that, in a way, was even a more formative musical education for me than playing in the band.
So, like, what were the songs of the day? What would have been in your repertoire at that time?
We were doing Enya. We were doing, like, Brandy and Monica, The Boy Is Mine.
Wow.
We did Dave Matthews Band.
Yeah, you did.
And I was essentially acting as the musical director and picking the songs and arranging them.
recordings of this.
I wonder if we
I
ever recorded.
I feel like this needs to. I feel like you need to sample some of that stuff, right?
Oh my God, that'd be
How dope
amazing.
would that sound?
We actually made money. We'd play like benefits and stuff. And
I mean, bring back
birthdays.
the accidentals, Caroline. I know some ladies who'd probably be down. You live in LA, can introduce you a cappella pop songs.
I mean, I love a cappella music. Not gonna lie. But that was amazing because I had to learn like how bass lines were written and how drum parts work, and would have to like hold those parts in my own body to write the lines, and also hold them in my own head, like with kind of remembering what the bass line's doing, what is the alto part doing, and I would write them in the most kind of chicken scratch way, not even in notation, just write out the letters. Like I'd write an A or a C, and then I'd teach each girl their part just by ear.
And figure out how to emulate the sound, something other than just, what noise to make, really.
I'd always get stuck beatboxing because I was the only one who could kind of do it, even though I really wanted to take the solo parts, but that, that was the sacrifice. But yeah, that was an amazing education in terms of, how does a bridge work? How does a pre-chorus work?
Yeah. Enya is an interesting thing in the mix with those other, which not that Enya didn't have a couple of moments of a song that was like kind of a single, but I'm intrigued, and I've noticed with that artists of your generation in particular have like have paid more attention to Enya as a great artist of her era than like people my age sort of missed it and were just like, oh, it's very new age or
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes and Noble, but like the true devotion that younger artists have to Enya, I really appreciate. But it's interesting to hear you name her in the mix with some of that other stuff because it highlights the way in which the things you like seem to be connected to each other or filtered through. Those are some of the things that I feel like your music definitely sounds. Like
Related to.
Related to the sort of goth R&B a cappella.
I'll take it.
A cappella goth R&B. I guess I am thinking about you sitting as a little kid with the keyboard and trying to figure out how to do Disney songs and then whatever, and then you in London trying to write songs nowadays, and how much it feels to you like it's still kind of a process of striving toward the same sound that you hear. How much of it feels kind of when you're really focused on it and like in your flow or whatever, like it's the same thing as when you first started to try and figure out songs.
It's always felt new, and it still feels new. The things that feel familiar are kind of the technical things, like the problem-solving aspects. I've got a lot more of a kind of mental arsenal for than I used to, obviously, but it always feels, the process of writing has always felt fresh and always felt new. And like, you said this thing about always striving towards the same thing. I feel like I've always kind of had a kind of abstract ideal that I'm striving for when I'm writing, but it's a moving target. It keeps changing from one album to another, even from one month to another. And very often that's based on something I'll hear that I'm like, this is amazing, and it will actually reroute me.
Wow, in a way that you're aware of, where you're just like, hold the phone.
Yep.
Factor this in now.
100%.
So what would be an example of something throughout your creative journey that you just came to an intersection and it hit you and you were like, well, we got to take this turn now?
Well, there's a Japanese band called Dip in the Pool. They were working in the late 80s, early 90s, and they did something really funny and kind of sabotagey, but they only released their albums on laser discs with like essentially as visual albums.
Wow.
Which is really normal now, but in the 90s that was a pretty wild move. But anyway, their music has just kind of had a repopularization because it's all ended up on YouTube. And I've been listening to their music, and towards the beginning of working on this record, I was listening to a song of theirs and I realized there was something so pristine and yet like human about a song of theirs, which is called Rabo del Sol. And I kind of just said, you know what, I think this next chapter of what I'm going to do needs to be dedicated towards something that's that reduced, that's that perfect. It's like looking at a flower or something. It's like pristine and beautiful and perfect, but completely organic. And of course, I rerouted multiple times between that point and now. But that was a moment of total clarity, actually. I was hearing that song and not thinking that I wanted to imitate anything sonic about that song, but aspiring towards making something that would make me feel the way that song made me feel.
Wow. Have you ever read the Susan Orlean book, Adaptation?
No.
No, The Orchid Thief, actually, sorry, is the book. Adaptation is the movie based on the book. It's crazy. I also recommend the movie Adaptation because it's so meta about the concept of adapting things. The book is based on an article that Susan Orlean wrote for The New Yorker, where she followed this orchid specialist who's obsessed with like this one specific variety of orchid that's like elusive, but you learn, there's just, orchids are fascinating. It's like a world where it's just like so specific but so vast. And she writes about this character who is obsessed with orchids, and it's a lens through which, she's able to examine sort of what's important to her and like what's the one thing that you care, care about that much. And it's really great. It's just reminded me of.
The hunt.
Of yeah, exactly, the looking for something to focus on, that you're like, this is the perfect encapsulation of the Orchid Thief is what it's called. So let's talk a bit about making this Caroline Polachek album, the official Caroline Polachek album, because for listeners who might not be familiar, who may know you from Chairlift but not have been aware of the releases that you've done on your own, there was the Ramona Lisa thing, and then a couple of years ago, a collection just under your initials, CEP, which was a different sounding, more experimental musically. I get why that was not like the solo debut or whatever. But talk to me for a bit about why you decided to do the Ramona Lisa thing, and not, was there reservations at that time about just putting it out under your name? Already people knew your name.
Oh, there wasn't a second thought in my mind. I really approached that song almost the way a director would approach a short film. It felt very contained, like a kind of capsule, and with a very clear start and end. And it didn't feel like me, although there are kind of, narrative strains and lyrics that do come from my life. It was more like just a zone that I wanted to kind of dwell in and bottle up for people and then move on from. It wasn't meant to be part of Chairlift or part of a longer trajectory. And honestly, that was really liberating, because at that point I'd already been in a band for a decade.
Yeah.
And there'd been so much mutation from one album to the other with Chairlift. And also, like, Patrick and I are both textbook Geminis, where we both have such eclectic taste, and really liked making music that was wildly different from one song to another. So to have a side project that was going to be so clearly defined by a certain palette and by a certain time frame was really liberating.
Yeah.
So that was a project that was dedicated to the idea of like pastorals, like a pastoral painting, pastoral themes, pastoral music.
Right.
But making it with MIDI instruments that were imitating live ones in a very crude way. So I kind of saw the whole project in these very like flat, hieroglyphic kind of paper doll terms, where things were like, kind of like shadow puppets, kind of virtual storytelling in a very crude way.
How much of that kind of thing, looking back now, or with any album you've made, is you going into it with a sort of articulated set of ideas, or a mental mood board about what you think you're going to try and do or have it sound like, versus it just becoming what it's going to be while you're in there? And with this new album specifically, like, how much did you go into it with an idea for what you wanted it to be?
I went into this with a much more ambitious sense of what I wanted it to be, which was essentially knowing that this is going to be the next large trajectory that I dedicate myself to as a musician, which was really intimidating, because I was like, there's so many different sounds I'm interested in. Does this need to encapsulate all of them? Maybe, maybe not. But the main thing for me was I wanted it to really be about my voice, because I think that's the instrument that I have the most fluidity with, and that, kind of defines me as a musician the most. And I really approached the record as being really about singing, which I'd never actively done before. And it felt way more undefined what the rest of it would be. So there was a lot more exploration.
Right.
Also, at every project, including the solo projects, I'd had a huge amount of kind of helpful limitations on. Like, even with Chairlift, I knew that I was going to be working with a bandmate the whole time. And usually there was a kind of space that we were rooted to, just for, logistical reasons, like whether it was our rehearsal space, our writing space, or one recording studio. There was some kind of anchor, whereas for the first time in my life, there was no sense of anchor at all, like either in terms of location or in terms of collaborators. Like, I've always been the girl that people could call up to be guests on their music. And suddenly I was like, wait a minute, I can be the one who picks up the phone now.
Right.
It felt a lot about experimenting.
Right.
Like just trying things and seeing what worked.
Right.
And sometimes the things that I thought would work the best just didn't work at all. And the things that I didn't have as much kind of optimism about ended up being the best. So I got surprised at so many turns.
Right. So what felt sort of like kind of some of the breakthrough moments, or what were the tracks that felt like really where you were starting to see this thing taking shape?
Well, the biggest breakthrough moment was probably October of 2016, which is ages ago now. It's crazy. Chairlift was still touring, but we had a month break in the fall, and I went to LA to begin writing for what I knew would be my solo record, even though I didn't have a contract or anything for it in place yet. I knew that that's what I was going to do next. Patrick and I had actually already had the conversation about Chairlift breaking up. And I went to LA to do a combination of top-line writing for other artists and like begin writing for myself. And while I was there, I had a top-line writing session booked with Danielle Harl, who had previously done a single with. And the night before our session, I had taken a bunch of mushrooms with a friend on the beach, and while tripping...
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. There's nothing better than the perfect jean and going out top combo, or an outfit that perfectly matches your plans. Abercrombie's relaxed jean goes with every occasion. Date nights with something lace, or daytime with a cozy sweater. And their barrel jean will surprise you. It's the trend that will become a staple in your wardrobe. Abercrombie denim comes in tons of rises, fits, and washes. Find your perfect pair online or in store.
I had the realization that I shouldn't be doing top lining. It was one of those cosmic time is limited moments. And I canceled all my top lining sessions for the week while on the beach, including the one with Danielle Harl. And he wrote me back and said, well, we don't have to do top lining for anyone else. We should just write for you. So the next day we met up and we had like a 4-hour session, and we wrote a piece of music that neither one of us kind of saw coming. It's a song called Parachute. And it was wildly unstructured compared to anything he and I had ever put out before, and extremely expressionistic and so limited in palette. No drums. The key changes like 4 or 5 times, and it felt like a really pure kind of storytelling. Like the arc of the story and the music just follow each other in this really exact parallel. And we were both kind of so moved by it that we started immediately scheduling more sessions to work together. And up until that point, the record had kind of been a folk album in some ways, but kind of an electronic folk album. And once that song was in the folder, I essentially imagined I was starting from zero from that point.
Wow. I mean, how much music do you tend to have kind of like on a hard drive in progress? Are you more of a sort of proliferation kind of creator, or are you more sort of focus, finish, like put it out?
It actually depends on what stage I'm at. This was definitely a proliferate and then filter process. There are about 70 songs in the mix for this album. And then towards the end, I started cutting down, and at one point I thought this was going to be an 18-song record, and then I thought it was going to be a 10-song record, and of course landed on 14.
Right. It's nice and long. It feels like a lot of music. I mean, a lot of compelling track. It has a lot of compelling tracks on it.
Well, thanks.
Talk to me a bit about this sort of process of doing, songwriting sessions for listeners who aren't familiar. Top lining is that's the melody. That's the song of the song, and then there's the track, of course, as well. But there are a lot of recording artists who also do this kind of work in various combinations and in myriad studios around the world, just writing for prospective recordings that may or may not ever happen. Of course, in your case, you landed a really big one with Beyonce's No Angel, and I'm just curious sort of what you feel like has been the most useful to you, what you've learned the most or appreciated the most about having those experiences as you went into this process, like, that changed the person you are, the artist you are, going into making this new album.
I guess it's, if anything, it's given me a kind of almost religious trust in kind of like ideas appearing out of nowhere. Because so often when I'm going to a session, I'll get kind of anxious and feel like I haven't prepared anything. And let's be honest, like no one wants a writer to arrive in the room and be like, all right, I've got this prepared. That's no fun. But at the same time, it's also the biggest thrill when you leave after particularly a short session, like a 3 or 4 hour one, and you can leave and just be like, bam, there it is. Yeah. There's a song that didn't exist and no inkling of the song even existed.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it is weird.
What do you find that there's any consistent qualities that collaborators you have, or what do you think brings out the best in you from a collaborator?
I feel really lucky to like continually find myself in rooms with people who are so shockingly positive and open-minded. Like I think Sébastien Tellier was the first person that I ever had this kind of reaction to, because he and I wrote a song in, I want to say like 2009 or 2010. It was a duet, and I was just, at the time I was like, maybe like at my most kind of like picky and defensive I've ever been as an artist, and which thankfully I've grown out of. But remember, he just said yes to every single idea that anyone around had, and it somehow became good, because he'd say yes to ideas that I was like, I don't think that's a great lyric, or I don't think that's a very good drum line, but he would just say, yes, it's great, it's perfect, and then it would become great and perfect. And he did this with thing after thing after thing, even with the music video, that I think his kind of trust and positivity, like in this very cosmic way, would bring out the best of everyone who's around him. And I've since found myself in a room with a lot of people who work that way, like where in a lot of ways a big curatorial act is just what opportunities they'll even say yes to and be in the room with them. And once they're in the room, it's a lot of yes. Like Charlie XCX is another one who just blows my mind and works that way. She works so fast. She's such an amazing writer. And she's just like one of the most positive, open-minded collaborators ever. Like just saying yes, 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 next, yes, 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 next. And not in a way where the integrity of what she's doing is compromised. It's just like, yeah, I kind of aspire to be at that level of yes at some point.
Right. It's encouragement, but not false encouragement or something.
Oh, there's no false encouragement about it. And I think what it comes down to in a lot of cases is having very few preconceived notions or like dialed in expectations. So you really are approaching things open-ended. And so what you receive, you focus on it, you're interested in it, and you allow it to progress rather than being like, well, it's not the thing I was hoping it would be.
Right.
Can we make it more like the thing I was imagining?
Yeah. What's the next song that's going to be, is there another song that's going to be shared in advance of the album?
Yeah, there are 3 more, if not 4. One's coming out, or pair coming out later this month, called Ocean of Tears and Parachute. Parachute was the one I told you about that kind of started the direction for the whole album.
Yeah. Definitely got a Sade vibe from a lot of it in a way that is just so wonderful.
That makes me really happy to hear, because I grew up listening to a lot of Sade, and she's been so influential for so much of my generation, but I have to say I don't feel like I've ever been directly influenced by Sade, and I've never really attempted to pull anything from that music. But the reason I really appreciate people making that comparison is because the thing I love so much about Sade is you're really invited to just dwell in that music, to just like live in it. And it's not really so much about setting up these big drops or these big punchy lyrics. It's really like she sets up this environment that you are just in. Yeah. And it's like windows down, lean back, you're in it. Yeah. And that was a big thing of what I was trying to go for with Door, except funny enough, I mean, I guess it's kind of related. The song that kind of inspired Door more than anything was the Chic version, the Chic being Nile Rodgers' project, version of At Last I'm Free, the Robert Wyatt song.
Okay.
And the thing that I love so much about that music is it's got this chorus that you can't tell if it's deeply tragic or a complete revelation. The chorus is, at last I am free, I can hardly see in front of me, I can hardly see in front of me. At last I'm free, I can hardly see in front of me.
Wow.
And it's just chilling and so beautiful, because you can't tell if this is like an end of life experience or you're just blinded by ecstasy.
Right.
And it's almost just this idea of like transcendence, I guess, in that way.
Yeah.
And I didn't approach the lyric writing of Door as a kind of homage in any way. It was just an image that came to me and just was very direct. But I really aspired towards what that song does musically, which is it sets up this really hypnotic, warm, groove-heavy environment that's also deeply psychedelic and not trying to be psych with a capital P. The songs that are coming up next are the opposite. They're much more about like these lean, kind of pointed melodic experiences rather than the bowl, which Door kind of was.
Right.
But the album definitely fleshes out the space in between the two.
You must be stoked for it to be like almost coming out finally. Like,
I'm so excited. I've been waiting for this for years. It really seems like people get it and kind of are feeling what I wanted them to feel. So that's the reward.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap up.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for doing
this. This is great.
Caroline's album Pang is out now. Go get it. And coming up next, oh man, I'll tell you, it was difficult and sad listening back to the audio from this interview you're about to hear with Scott Weiland. I had the pleasure of interviewing him on the phone several times between 2001 and 2007 on assignment for Rolling Stone. And for context, the conversation you're about to hear was from summer of 2001 as Stone Temple Pilots were leading up to their album Shangri-La-Dee-Da. Also, Weiland was sober for the time being and a new dad, having welcomed the birth of a baby boy the previous year. In this excerpt, we talk about so much stuff. I mean, this is about half of what we recorded at the time, but we talk about sobriety. He was recently diagnosed bipolar, and that's something we discuss. We talk about Stone Temple Pilots' place in rock history and his love of the Flaming Lips album, The Soft Bulletin. It's fascinating, and it's sad, but I hope you'll listen to the whole thing. So, let's get into it.
Do you feel now like almost a completely different person?
Well, yeah, in so many ways, but you know what? It's so weird because, as soon as I start feeling well, I mean, I am a different person, but as soon as I start feeling like, that I've finally made it out of the darkness or something, then something happens or a few things happen that, and it seems like I get swallowed up by it again, and everything just seems, I don't know, just dark and bleak and all that, and I hate feeling that way, because I kind of felt like that once I stopped living the life that I lived, that I wouldn't necessarily need to, be in that place very often, and sometimes it still happens, and it's frustrating because I mean, the obvious thing that I felt was what kept me there for a long time, trapped in it, is gone really, and yet it still kind of happens. I mean, overall though, I mean, really, it is completely different. I mean, I am different. I'm forced to be different. I enjoy being different, and I'm trying to be even more so.
Are there any things about the old Scott Weiland that you miss?
Yeah, I guess, you know what, I guess the thing that at times that I do this is like, there are times when I feel like I would like just to be incredibly irresponsible and just to say, fuck it, like for a day or for a week or something. But, that's just not a reality, and I could do that, and I would pay a price for it, if even for a couple days, it's like, I'd pay a price mentally and emotionally, whatever, that whole thing, I would pay a price for it. And, that kind of random carelessness.
Right.
But at times, you know what, it's like that, it seems like there's nothing that I would like more than that. It's just sort of, the freedom to just be able to say, you know what, like, I want to check out for a day, but, it's just not a reality for me. And I kind of wish it was at times, I mean, I see it's a reality for a lot of my friends, like, guys in my band, like Dean. I mean, Dean can take narcotic vacations and binge on them for a few days. What would you like, honey? What would you like? You want me to give you your binky?
We talked a bit last time about about whether SDP have been sort of perennial underdogs and your feelings about that. But do you think you reach a certain point in your career where you cease to even notice that sort of thing?
Well, at times. At times, it's like I really feel unaffected by all that. I feel unaffected by what's going on in the, the pop community or even the rock community around me, and there's this almost a sense of, in a sense, in a way, it's kind of, feeling above it all,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of unaffected by it and that. But there are times that, there are times when I'm deep in the trenches of being involved in the business side of it,
Mm-hmm.
as kind of like as we are now, when it's not so much about the creation and the inspiration, the art, or even the moment, the performance of it. It's about talking about all that and about trying to get together with management and try to come up with ideas that are going to best maximize the potential of a record.
Right.
And when I'm forced with like realities of like what is going on around and what might affect, the success of the record, then all of a sudden I get drawn back into that, and I hate that because I don't like to be driven by those types of things. You know what I mean? And I really feel like I've gotten to a point, as a songwriter, and I feel like the band has gotten to a point as a band, and especially myself and Robert and Dean, the songwriters, where we really are making records and writing songs for ourselves, and at least we're completely on the path of that now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't really know where we're going to be on the next album or the one after that. And I'm sure we'll be even further along in that direction. But that's a very liberating feeling, but it's also kind of a frightening feeling because, you know what? I mean, since we're in sort of the maelstrom of self-promotion right now, and affected by like noticing like what other groups are doing the same sort of things, and what slew of current bands we're performing with at some of these festivals, and that you can't help but notice what's happening on the the commercial side of things, and I don't know, it's this huge distraction, but really ultimately I think that you get to a certain place, and I mean, we were so fortunate on our first 3 albums to have just had like an unnatural amount of success, and so being able to still be thought of as like a valid band that matters now, even more so now than we did when we actually had that kind of success,
right,
is a great sort of achievement, because we may never get back to the point where we're selling 7-6 million records every album, but where we are at now is we've grabbed a hold of like a place that where we will be until we decide to quit, and make records kind of the way we want to without feeling pressured by the label too much, and we now are with a management company that actually want to see us. They encourage us to grow musically and not feel trapped by being that the heavy dark band that we sort of were when we first started.
Right.
And they kind of encourage us to embrace the changes that we've been kind of going through musically. And so that's a nice thing,
Right.
But I mean, then again, I'm also a human being, and I'm very competitive, and it's, to tell you the truth, it at times is very frustrating to see bands that are basically aping what we did on our first 2 records,
mm-hmm.
and are commercially having a bigger impact with the tattooed nation.
Who are we talking about here?
Oh, I mean, it's endless, really, the list. I mean, but you know what? And some of those bands I actually am supportive of, and I appreciate where they have borrowed.
Right.
And I think they're definitely standing on their own, because I mean, God knows, I mean, we borrow, beg, and steal all the time. But there are some too that I kind of, I feel like they sort of just the plagiarization is does nothing but sort of like make me almost like not want to play those old songs anymore.
Do you ever feel like, well, gee, the zeitgeist or whatever is changing, and if what's contemporary and popular isn't in line with what we're doing, we just have to, ignore it and plow onward and do what we do.
Well, I think that's what you have to do. I mean, because you know what, the lasting artists that have sort of grown, gracefully and have had ups and downs through their growth, have kind of, at times maybe borrow a little bit from new exciting movements that happen, because there are exciting things that happen sometimes.
Right.
Once or maybe sometimes twice a decade, there are some exciting things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's good to borrow from those things. I mean, I think Bowie's done that.
Right.
He doesn't consistently make the greatest records like he used to, but he still has moments that still shine, and I think Dylan does that.
Right.
Amazingly. And I think like Time Out of Mind is my favorite Bob Dylan record. And, as a whole album.
Right.
And, and so I think there are ways of doing that, and you just kind of have to start realizing, we were part of something at one time, but what we become is bigger than that, and more important than that. And, once you're already at the top, it's just like, you do a good job and you're true to yourself and you'll stay there.
Right.
If you want to. And that's kind of like what we want to do. I mean, I'll promise you this, though. For the sake of success, never, ever will we entertain the idea of having somebody write for us. The day that if anyone from our record company or management ever suggested that, it wouldn't just be like, you're fired, or it would seriously be like, you know what, this band will cease to exist from this point on. That will never ever happen. But I mean, and I know people do that. They sell that. See, to me, that's a sellout. I would sell one of my songs to, any car commercial in the world that paid me enough money.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't consider that a sellout.
Right.
I already wrote the song. I wrote the song. It's like what it means to me, and it was like a moment that it was like a true expression of what I felt. And you know what? You want to put it on a commercial and make cut it, do whatever you want to. Fine. It doesn't change what I created.
Right.
But if I'm trying to hold on to some kind of idea of the top of the pops, type of thing,
mm-hmm.
Stay on in the top 10 for weeks on end, have number one records time and time again at the age of like in say like 10 years when I'm in my 40s.
Right.
And to do that, I'm willing to let Glenn Ballard write songs for me. You know what? Like fuck that. I don't want any part of that.
You don't want to bring in Diane Warren.
No, never ever happen ever.
Do you have contemporaries, other bands of your generation that you feel a particular kinship with?
Yeah, there's a lot, really. I mean, you know what? I think we came out at a time when there was a very exciting period in rock and roll, and everyone sort of growing up through the '80s, I think, bonded in the underground,
right?
And what was going on mostly above ground, at least in the world of rock and roll, was nothing that myself or my friends or my contemporaries were really a part of, and. But then again, when we first got a record deal and first came out, that was like right when Nevermind was just exploding, and as our record first came out, a few months later, Pearl Jam then started to explode, and we were sort of like attached to that, and then everyone knows about that story and lumped in with that, and at the time, you just like so badly want to be. It's like, we knew who we were and we knew what we were about. And we wanted people to appreciate us like we appreciate ourselves and how we appreciated each other. And to not be judged on your own merit when you're very young and very insecure and want to be appreciated. That was difficult. And so I think we purposely, did everything we could, musically and in every way, to move away from that kind of connection. But now, looking back at that time, after 5 albums, there are a lot of artists that still make records. A lot of them, that are dead. A lot of them, that are on their way to dying. Who I really appreciate. And And looking back at a decade of rock and roll, I feel very, very proud and content with being a part of a movement that, was really important for rock.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on turbotax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
You listen to a fair amount of new music, don't you?
Yeah, I do. A lot of old stuff and a lot of new stuff. But you know what? I'm kind of like this. As I've gotten a little older, I've sort of become less interested on what is like spur of the moment and what is like incredibly new and incredibly, because when you're younger, you always want to impress your friends by explain to somebody about this new band that you discovered. And now it's usually I usually don't discover things. Like a friend of mine is also another musician or something like that. Will turn me on to something, and I'll really like it, and I'll get into it, and then I'll stay into it for a while. That's kind of like how I got turned on to the Flaming Lips, and I've been like a huge Flaming Lips fan, ever since. I think one of the most inspiring records for me in the last probably the last 5 years was the Soft Bulletin album that they made, the last one.
That Superman song?
Yeah, that song, it's the most beautiful song they ever wrote.
Oh, my God. No, I know. I just could listen to that song over and over again.
I do a lot of times. Like, if I'm on an airplane, I'll listen to it over and over and over and over again. And I really would Dean and I almost learned that just to perform it live while we were in Europe and the UK last week. We did some acoustic shows, but we had to learn some of our own new material first, since we don't even know how to play some of our own new material. But that record just kills me, and there's also this band. They're starting to get well known here now. I'm sure you know that band Sigaros.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I really love them, and it was like last spring I got turned on to them, and Dean actually played it for me the first time. Someone sent us a CD while we were on the road, and it's just kind of like one of those things. I knew nothing about him, and but when somebody sends you a CD and says you should listen to this, it's like, it's good to give it a listen, especially if it's from a friend.
Right.
They probably have an idea what you might be into, and we stuck it in the CD player in the dressing room, and it's sort of become part of the soundtrack of my life over the last year.
No, that's a beautiful record.
Yeah.
You should check out this band, The Shins.
Really?
On Sub Pop. I just saw them play last night. They opened for the Red House Painters.
Really?
Yeah. And it's really nice. I think you'd like it. It's got like some kind of hint of like Beach Boys-y kind of stuff, but it's kind of like if you crossed like a little bit of Built to Spill in there.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out.
You know what's also really good is this band that Kenny Weinstein's been working with. They're from New York City.
The Strokes, yeah. Is that who you're talking about?
What's that?
The Strokes?
Yes.
No, they're fucking excellent.
They are really good. He came in the studio over at Lavish last summer when I had just reformed the Campfire Girls and signed them to my label, and so we were in the studio over my studio working on some tunes, and Kenny came over. And he played that for me, and the guys from the Campfire Girls were just besides themselves. They all of a sudden started rethinking all the guitars they had just laid down.
Oh my God, you should hear the LP.
Really? Is it amazing?
It's fucking amazing.
I've only heard the demos. Well, if at the drive-in ever decide to like tour again soon, they should take the Strokes out with them.
Oh, definitely. While I have you, let me ask you a couple of questions. We're doing this elaborate thing where we're talking to a variety of people, artists and actors and policymakers about drug policy in this country. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about that. Do you think that prison is an appropriate punishment for marijuana use?
No, I don't think it's appropriate punishment for drug use. I mean, if you're a nonviolent drug offender, I mean, if you're going to hold, if you're a junkie, or you're a crackhead or whatever, and you do an armed robbery, and someone gets injured, or someone even has a nervous breakdown and has to spend a few weeks in the nut house to recover from it, then it's like it's not nonviolent anymore. And you know what, you could have made a decision to go on Santa Monica Boulevard and suck cock. I mean, that's what I would do rather than hold a bank up.
Right.
I had to if I had no money.
Right.
So I kind of feel like nonviolent drug offenders should be, it's like you don't throw people in prison because they've got they suffer from bipolar disorder,
right?
Or because they suffer from personality disorder, or any of those mental deficiencies, and that's really there's no difference really. It's just that the symptoms are a little bit different, and I don't know. The whole thing goes kind of deep. I mean, and there are a lot of things, there are a lot of extensions to that too. I mean, I think one of the worst problems with drug offenders going to prison are the mandatory minimums, because that's really where you see how how it's pointed towards people of color and people that don't have money.
Right.
There are people that are doing longer jail sentences for drugs in prisons in some states than there are for people that have committed murder.
It's crazy. So do you really have bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I've had it my whole life, but it wasn't like really diagnosed correctly until about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it was always misdiagnosed.
Really?
As like when I was a young child, it was misdiagnosed as hyperactivity, and then it was ADD, and then it was OCD, AD, or whatever. You know what I mean? Then it was just depression, and I really just started taking medication or trying medication while I was in my 20s, and it was always depression medication, but that didn't do anything for me. It just made me feel really anxious, and so. At one point, I finally had a bunch of tests taken, hours and hours of tests, and blood and all this stuff, and they found that it was bipolar disorder, manic depressive disorder, so the medication I was prescribed was Depakote.
Mm-hmm.
It worked, but I didn't like the effects of it, and so I don't take it.
Right, it makes everything too even.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a very, very bad place for an artist to be. I don't have fear of writing songs without being under the influence of narcotics or alcohol, but I do have an incredible fear of writing songs without being able to feel my range of emotion. And the thing is, the thing that's kind of sad is that those medicines they use for that, have like Depakote and then there's two others. Tegretol,
mm-hmm.
and one that actually Kurt wrote a song about, lithium. Those are ancient drugs.
Yeah,
they've been around forever. It's like, come on, man. Look at all the technology they have with like computers and like, cloning animals. Sending people, things to Mars and stuff. It's like. Come on, you got to be able to develop something that's a little bit more, current, modern than those that they've been using since, like for half a century. But anyway, well, listen, I better get going.
Yes.
I got to try to figure out a way how to finish watching the final Laker game that I had sent to me because I was in Europe, and take a nap and go to rehearsal.
Sad that he's gone, and I feel so fortunate, honored, really, to have been able to have a conversation like that with such a great artist and great person. R.I.P. Scott Weiland. I'm Jenny Elliskew, feeling emotional, but you know what? We're at the end of the episode. Perfect timing. And thanks again to Caroline Polachek, who I think will be doing tour dates next year, so bookmark her website to stay in the loop on that. Episode 37 will feature an interview with Bat for Lashes' Natasha Khan. I love her to pieces. That's coming up in a few weeks. Subscribe if you haven't done that already, and remember you can reach me with questions and feedback at Jenny LSQ.